Exercise 1.
Hello, Pembroke Cycling Holidays. Bob speaking.
Oh, hello. I've seen your advert for people to lead cycle trips. Are you the right person to speak to?
Yes, I am. Could I have your name, please?
It's Margaret Smith.
Are you looking for a permanent job, Margaret?
No, temporary. I've got a permanent job starting in a few months' time, and I want to do something else until then.
What work do you do?
This will probably sound crazy. I used to be a lawyer, and then I made a complete career change, and I'm going to be a doctor. I've just finished my training.
Right. And have you had any experience of leading cycle trips?
Yes, I've led several bike tours in Africa. The trip to India that I had arranged to lead next month has now been cancelled. So when I saw you were advertising for tour leaders, I decided to apply.
OK. Now, we normally have 2 or 3 leaders on a trip, depending on the size of the group. Some tours are for very experienced cyclists, but we've got a tour coming up soon in Spain, which is proving so popular we need an additional leader. It's a cycling holiday for families. Would that suit you?
It certainly would. I enjoy working with children, and I probably need some more experience before I go on a really challenging trip.
That tour includes several teenagers. Have you worked with that age group before?
Yes, I'm a volunteer worker in a youth club where I help people to improve their cycling skills. Before that, I helped out in a cycling club where I taught beginners.
Well, that's great. Now, the trip I mentioned is just for a fortnight, but there might be the possibility of leading other tours after that. Would that fit in with your plans?
That'd be fine. I'll be free for 5 months. My job is due to start on October the 2nd, and I'm available from May the 1st until late September.
Good. Now, is there anything I need to know about the food you eat? We usually have 1 or 2 people in the group who don't eat meat or have some sort of food allergy, so we're always very careful about that.
Yes, I'm allergic to cheese. Would that be a problem?
No. As long as we have enough notice, we can deal with that.
That's great. It sounds really interesting. Would you like me to fill in an application form?
Yes, please. Where should I post it to?
Could you send it to 27 Arbuthnot Place, Arbuthnot Place, Dumfries?
And what's the postcode, please?
DG7 4PH.
Was that P Papa or B Bravo?
P Papa.
Got that. If you could return the application form by Friday this week, we can interview you on Tuesday next week. Say 2:30? Would that be possible for you?
Yes, it's fine. You're quite a long way from where I live, so I'll drive over on Monday. Should I bring anything to the interview?
We'll have your application form, of course, but we'll need to see any certificates you've got that are relevant in cycling, first aid or whatever.
OK.
And at the interview, we'd like to find out about your experience of being a tour guide. So, could you prepare a 10-minute talk about that, please? You don't need slides or any complicated equipment, just some notes.
Right. I'll start thinking about that straight away.
Good. Well, we'll look forward to receiving your application form and we'll contact you to confirm the interview.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Margaret. Goodbye.
Bye.
Exercise 2.
Welcome to this podcast about the sheep market, which is one of the oldest parts of the city. As its name suggests, there was originally a market here where farmers brought their sheep, but now it's been redeveloped into a buzzing, vibrant area of the city, which is also home to one of the city's fastest-growing communities. The nearby university has always meant the area's popular with students who come in to enjoy the lively nightlife, but now graduates embarking on careers in the worlds of fashion and design are buying up the new apartments recently built here to replace the small houses where the market workers used to live. The narrow old side streets are great places for finding original pictures, jewellery and ceramics which won't break the bank, as well as local produce like fruit and vegetables. There's also lots of pavement cafes where you can have a coffee and watch tourists from all over the world go by. The oldest buildings in the area are on the main streets, including the city's first department store, built in the 1880s, which is still open today. The sheep market is a centre for fashion, and there's a policy of encouraging new young designers. The Young Fashion Competition is open to local young people who are passionate about fashion. This year they've been asked to design an outfit based on ideas from the music and technology that's part of their everyday life, using both natural and man-made fibres. The garments will be judged by a panel of experts and fashion designers, and the winning entries will be modelled at a special gala evening. Parking at the sheep market is easy. There are plenty of pay and display car parking spaces on the roadsides, which are fine if you just want to stay for an hour or two. But if you want to spend the day there, it's better to park in one of the 4 underground car parks. It's not expensive, and if you can present a receipt from one of the local stores, you'll not be charged at all. After 6 p.m, many of the car parks have a flat rate which varies, but it is usually very reasonable. The sheep market is one of the main centres for art and history in the whole of the country. If you look at our map, you'll see some of the main attractions there. Most visitors start from Crawley Road at the bottom of the map. The Reynolds House is one of the oldest houses in the city and is open to the public. It's on the north side of Crawley Road, next to the footpath that leads to the public gardens. The area is particularly interesting for its unusual sculptures. The thumb is just what its name suggests, but it's about 10 metres high. You'll see it on Hill Road, across the road from the bank. The museum's got a particularly fine collection of New Zealand landscapes. It's on the east side of the sheep market, on City Road. It's on the other side of the road from the public gardens, immediately facing the junction with Hill Road. The Contemporary Art Gallery is on a little road that leads off Station Square, not far from the public gardens. The road ends at the gallery. It doesn't go anywhere else. That's open every day except Mondays. The Warner Gallery specialises in 19th century art. It's on City Road, near the junction with Crawley Road, on the same side of the road as the public gardens. It's open on weekdays from 9 to 5 and entry is free. Finally, if you're interested in purchasing high-quality artwork, the place to go is Nucleus. You need to go from Crawley Road up through Station Square and east along Hill Road until you get to a small winding road turning off. Go up there and it's on your right. If you get to City Road, you've gone too far.
Exercise 3.
Joe, you know I'm giving a presentation in our film studies class next week.
Yes?
Well, could we discuss it? I could do with getting someone else's opinion.
Of course, Katie. What are you going to talk about?
It's about film adaptations of Shakespeare's plays. I've got very interested in all the different approaches that film directors take.
Uh-huh.
So I thought I'd start with Giannetti, who's a professor of film and literature, and in one of his books he came up with a straightforward classification of film adaptations based on how faithful they are to the original plays and novels.
Right.
I've already made some notes on that, so I just need to sort those out before the presentation. I thought that next I'd ask the class to come up with the worst examples of Shakespeare adaptations that they've seen, and to say why. That should be more fun than having their favourite versions.
Yes, I can certainly think of a couple.
Right. Next, I want to talk about Rachel Malco. I came across something on the internet about her work on film adaptations, and I was thinking of showing some film clips to illustrate her ideas.
Will you have enough time, though, both to prepare and during the presentation? After all, I doubt if you'll be able to find all the clips you want.
Perhaps you're right. OK, well, I'd better do some slides instead, saying how various films relate to what she says. That should encourage discussion. Next, I want to say something about how plays may be chosen for adaptation because they're concerned with issues of the time when the film is made.
You mean things like patriotism or the role of government?
Exactly. It's quite tricky, but I've got a few ideas I'd like to discuss. And finally, I want to talk about a few adaptations that I think illustrate a range of approaches and make some comments on them. Do you know the Japanese film Ran?
I haven't seen it. It was based on Shakespeare's King Lear, wasn't it?
That's right. It was a very loose adaptation, using the same situation and story, but moving it to 16th century Japan instead of 16th century Britain. So, for example, the king's daughters become sons, because in Japanese culture at that time, women couldn't succeed to the throne.
OK. I hope you're going to talk about the 1993 film of Much Ado About Nothing. I think that's one of the best Shakespeare films. It really brings the play to life, doesn't it?
Yes, I agree. And I think filming it in Italy, where the play is set, makes you see what life was like at the time of the play.
Absolutely. Right, what's next?
Next, I thought Romeo and Juliet, the 1996 film, which moves the action into the present day.
Yes, it worked really well, I thought, changing the two feuding families in the original to two competing business empires, even though they're speaking in the English of the original play.
You'd expect it would sound really bizarre, but I found I soon got used to it.
Me too.
Then I thought I'd include a real Hollywood film, one that's intended to appeal to a mass commercial audience.
There must be quite a number of those.
Yes, but I've picked the 1996 film of Hamlet. It included every line of the text, but it's more like a typical action hero movie. There are loads of special effects, but no unifying interpretation of the play.
All show and no substance.
Exactly. Then there's Prospero's Books, based on The Tempest. That was really innovative from a stylistic point of view.
Didn't it include dance and singing and animation as well as live actors?
Yes, it did. I also want to mention Looking for Richard. Did you ever see it?
No, but I've read about it. It was a blend of a documentary with a few scenes from Richard III, wasn't it?
That's right. It's more a way of looking into how people nowadays connect with the playwright. The play is really just the starting point. And that'll be where I finish.
Well, it sounds as though it'll be very interesting.
Exercise 4.
This lecture will be about the science of acoustics, the study of sound, in relation to urban environments such as cities. As an acoustic engineer myself, I think this is an area where we're likely to see great changes. In the past, researching urban soundscapes was simple. We measured levels of sound in decibels, so I used to take my sound meter and I measured the noise somewhere. And then I might ask a sample of people to say at what level the sound became annoying. With data like this, acoustic engineers have been able to build up what we call noise maps, maps of the sound environment. But actually, these aren't a lot of use. What they do show is that the highest noise levels are generally on roads. Well, that's not really very surprising. But there's quite a lot going on that these maps don't show, because they can't capture the complex way that sound varies over time. So they ignore important issues such as the noise someone might hear from the open windows or gardens of their neighbours. And this sort of noise can be quite significant in summer. We don't have any databases on this sort of information. As well as that, these records of sound levels take no account of the fact that people vary in their perceptions of noise. So someone like me with years of working in acoustics might be very different from you in that regard. But anyway, even though these noise maps are fairly crude, they've been useful in providing information and raising awareness that noise matters. We need to deal with it, and so it's a political matter. And that's important. We need rules and regulations because noise can cause all sorts of problems. Those of you who are city dwellers know that things go on 24 hours a day, so city dwellers often suffer from interrupted sleep. It's also known that noise can lead to a rise in levels of stress due to physical changes in the body affecting the composition of the blood. And there are other problems as well. For instance, if school children don't have a quiet place to study, their work will suffer. Now, one problem with decibel measurement is that it doesn't differentiate between different types of noise. Some types of sounds that most people would probably think of as nice and relaxing might well score quite highly in decibel levels. Think of the sound made by a fountain in a town square, for example. That's not necessarily something that we'd want to control or reduce. So maybe researchers should consider these sorts of sounds in urban design. This is going to be tricky, because just measuring decibel levels isn't going to help us here. Instead, many researchers are using social science techniques, studying people's emotional response to sound by using questionnaires and so on. So what exactly do people want to hear in an urban environment? Some recent interdisciplinary research has come out with results that at first sight seem contradictory. A city needs to have a sense of activity, so it needs to be lively, with sounds like the clack of high heels on a pavement or the hiss of a coffee machine. But these mustn't be too intrusive, because at the same time we need to be able to relax. One of the major problems in achieving this will be getting architects and town planners to use the research. Apart from studying the basics of acoustics, these people receive very little training in this area. But in fact, they should be regarding sound as an opportunity to add to the experience of urban living, whereas at present they tend to see it as something to be avoided or reduced as far as possible, or something that's just a job for engineers, like the street drainage system. What's needed is for noise in cities to be regarded as an aesthetic quality, as something that has the qualities of an art form. If we acknowledge this, then we urgently need to know what governs it and how designers can work with it. We need to develop a complex understanding of many factors. What is the relationship between sound and culture? What can we learn from disciplines such as psychology about the way that sound interacts with human development and social relationships, and the way that sound affects our thoughts and feelings? Can we learn anything from physics about the nature of sound itself? Today's powerful technologies can also help us. To show us their ideas and help us to imagine the effect their buildings will have, architects and town planners already use virtual reality. But these programs are silent. In the future, such programs could use realistic sounds, meaning that soundscapes could be explored before being built. So hopefully, using the best technology we can lay our hands on, the city of the future will be a pleasure to the ears as well as the eyes.
Exercise 5.
Hello?
Oh, hello. I wanted to inquire about hiring a room in the village hall for the evening of September the 1st.
Let me just see. Yes, we have both rooms available that evening. There's our main hall, that's got seating for 200 people. Or there's the Charlton room.
Sorry?
The Charlton room. CHARLTON. That's got seating for up to 100.
Well, we're organising a dinner to raise money for a charity, and we're hoping for at least 150 people. So, I think we'll go for the main hall. How much would that cost?
Let's see. You wanted it for the evening of September the 1st?
Yes, that's a Saturday.
So from 6 p.m. to midnight, that'd be £115. That's the weekend price. It's £75 on weekdays.
That's all right.
And I have to tell you, there's also a deposit of £250, which is returnable, of course, as long as there's no damage. But we do insist that this is paid in cash. We don't take cards for that. You can pay the actual rent of the room however you like, though. Cash, credit card, cheque.
Oh, well, I suppose that's okay. So, does the charge include use of tables and chairs and so on?
Oh, yes.
And what about parking?
Yeah, that's all included. The only thing that isn't included is, you said you were organising a dinner?
Yeah.
Well, you'll have to pay extra for the kitchen if you want to use that. It's £25. It's got very good facilities, good quality cookers and fridges and so on.
OK. Well, I suppose that's all right. We can cover the cost in our entry charges.
Right, so I'll make a note of that. Now, there are just one or two things you need to think about before the event. For example, you'll have to see about getting a licence if you're planning to have any music during the meal.
Oh, really?
It's quite straightforward. I'll give you the details later on. And about a week or 10 days before your event, you'll need to contact the caretaker, that's Mr. Evans, to make the arrangements for entry. He'll sort that out with you.
And do I give him the payment as well?
No, you do that directly with me.
Exercise 6.
Welcome to the Fiddy Working Heritage Farm. This open-air museum gives you the experience of agriculture and rural life in the English countryside at the end of the 19th century. So you'll see a typical farm of that period, and like me, all the staff are dressed in clothes of that time. I must give you some advice and safety tips before we go any further. As it's a working farm, please don't frighten or injure the animals. We have a lot here, and many of them are breeds that are now quite rare. And do stay at a safe distance from the tools. Some of them have sharp points, which can be pretty dangerous, so please don't touch them. We don't want any accidents, do we? The ground is very uneven, and you might slip if you're wearing sandals, so I'm glad to see you're all wearing shoes. We always advise people to do that. Now, children of all ages are very welcome here, and usually even very young children love the ducks and lambs, so do bring them along next time you come. I don't think any of you have brought dogs with you, but in case you have, I'm afraid they'll have to stay in the car park unless they're guide dogs. I'm sure you'll understand that they could cause a lot of problems on a farm. Now let me give you some idea of the layout of the farm. The building where you bought your tickets is the new barn immediately to your right. And we're now at the beginning of the main path to the farmland. And of course, the car park is on your left. The scarecrow you can see in the car park in the corner beside the main path is a traditional figure for keeping the birds away from crops. But our scarecrow is a permanent sculpture. It's taller than a human being, so you can see it from quite a distance. If you look ahead of you, you'll see a maze. It's opposite the new barn, beside the side path that branches off to the right, just over there. The maze is made out of hedges which are too tall for young children to see over them, but it's quite small, so you can't get lost in it. Now, can you see the bridge crossing the fish pool further up the main path? If you want to go to the cafe, go towards the bridge and turn right just before it. walk along the side path and the cafes on the first bend you come to. The building was originally the schoolhouse, and it's well over 100 years old. As you may know, we run skills workshops here, where you can learn traditional crafts like woodwork and basket making. You can see examples of the work and talk to someone about the courses in the Black Barn. If you take the side path to the right, here, just by the new barn, you'll come to the Black Barn, just where the path first bends. Now, I mustn't forget to tell you about picnicking, as I can see some of you have brought your lunch with you. You can picnic in the field, though do clear up behind you, of course. Or if you'd prefer a covered picnic area, there's one near the farmyard, just after you cross the bridge. There's a covered picnic spot on the right. And the last thing to mention is Fiddy House itself. From here you can cross the bridge, then walk along the footpath through the field to the left of the farmyard. That goes to the house, and it'll give you a lovely view of it. It's certainly worth a few photographs, but as it's a private home, I'm afraid you can't go inside. Right, well, if you're all ready, we'll set off on our tour of the farm.
Exercise 7.
OK, Greg. So I finally managed to read the article you mentioned. The one about the study on gender in physics.
About the study of college students done by Akira Miyake and his team. Yeah, I was interested that the researchers were actually a mix of psychologists and physicists. That's an unusual combination.
Yeah. I got a little confused at first about which students the study was based on. They weren't actually majoring in physics. They were majoring in what's known as the STEM disciplines. That's science, technology, engineering and
math. Yes, but they were all doing physics courses as part of their studies.
That's correct. So, as I understood it, Miyake and co. started from the fact that women are underrepresented in introductory physics courses at college, and also that, on average, the women who do enrol on these courses perform more poorly than the men. No one really knows why this is the case.
Yeah, but what the researchers wanted to find out was basically what they could do about the relatively low level of the women's results. But in order to find a solution, they needed to find out more about the nature of the problem.
Right. Now, let's see if I can remember. It was that in the physics class, the female students thought the male students all assumed that women weren't any good at physics. Was that it? And they thought that the men expected them to get poor results in their tests.
That's what the women thought, and that made them nervous, so they did get poor results. But actually, they were wrong. No one was making any assumptions about the female students at all.
Anyway, what Miyake's team did was quite simple, getting the students to do some writing before they went into the physics class. What did they call it?
Values affirmation. They had to write an essay focusing on things that were significant to them, not particularly to do with the subject they were studying, but more general things like music or people who mattered to them.
Right. So the idea of doing the writing is that this gets the students thinking in a positive way.
And putting these thoughts into words can relax them and help them overcome the psychological factors that lead to poor performance. Yeah. But what the researchers in the study hadn't expected was that this one activity raised the women's physics grades from the C to the B range.
A huge change. Pity it wasn't to an A, but still. No, but it does suggest that the women were seriously underperforming beforehand in comparison with the men.
Yes. Mind you, Miyake's article left out a lot of details, like did the students do the writing just once or several times? And had they been told why they were doing the writing? That might have affected the results.
You mean If they know the researchers thought it might help them to improve, then they just try to fulfill that expectation?
Exactly. So anyway, I thought for our project we could do a similar study, but investigate whether it really was the writing activity that had that result.
OK, so we could ask them to do a writing task about something completely different, something more factual, like a general knowledge topic.
Maybe, or we could have half the students doing a writing task and half doing something else, like an oral task.
Or even half do the same writing task as in the original research and half do a factual writing task. Then we'd see if it really is the topic that made the difference or something else.
That's it. Good. So, at our meeting with the supervisor on Monday, we can tell him we've decided on our project. We should have our aims ready by then. I suppose we need to read the original study. The article's just a summary.
And there was another article I read by Smolinski. It was about her research on how women and men perform in mixed teams in class, compared with single-sex teams and on their own.
Let me guess, the women were better at teamwork.
That's what I expected. But actually, the men and the women got the same results, whether they were working in teams or on their own. But I guess it's not that relevant to us.
What worries me, anyway, is how we're going to get everything done in the time.
We'll be okay now we know what we're doing. Though I'm not clear how we assess whether the students in our experiment actually make any progress or not.
No, we may need some advice on that. The main thing's to make sure we have the right size sample, not too big or too small.
That shouldn't be difficult. Right, what do we need to do next? We could have a look at the timetable for the science classes. Or perhaps we should just make an appointment to see one of the science professors. That'd be better.
Great. And we could even get to observe one of the classes.
What for?
Well, OK, maybe let's just go with your idea. Right, well, I think that's everything for now.
Exercise 8.
I've been looking at ocean biodiversity. That's the diversity of species that live in the world's oceans. About 20 years ago, biologists developed the idea of what they called biodiversity hotspots. These are the areas which have the greatest mixture of species. So, one example is Madagascar. These hotspots are significant because they allow us to locate key areas for focusing efforts at conservation. Biologists can identify hotspots on land fairly easily, but until recently, very little was known about species distribution and diversity in the oceans, and no one even knew if hotspots existed there. Then a Canadian biologist called Boris Worm did some research in 2005 on data on ocean species that he got from the fishing industry. Worm located 5 hotspots for large ocean predators, like sharks, and looked at what they had in common. The main thing he'd expected to find was that they had very high concentrations of food, but to his surprise, that was only true for 4 of the hotspots. The remaining hotspot was quite badly off in that regard. But what he did find was that in all cases, the water at the surface of the ocean had relatively high temperatures, even when it was cool at greater depths. So, this seemed to be a factor in supporting a diverse range of these large predators. However, this wasn't enough on its own, because he also found that the water needed to have enough oxygen in it. So these 2 factors seemed necessary to support the high metabolic rate of these large fish. A couple of years later, in 2007, a researcher called Lisa Balance, who was working in California, also started looking for ocean hotspots, but not for fish. What she was interested in was marine mammals, things like seals. And she found 3 places in the oceans which were hotspots, and what these had in common was that these hotspots were all located at boundaries between ocean currents, and this seems to be the sort of place that has lots of the plankton that some of these species feed on. So now people who want to protect the species that are endangered need to get as much information as possible. For example, there's an international project called the Census of Marine Life. They've been surveying oceans all over the world, including the Arctic. One thing they found there, which stunned other researchers, was that there were large numbers of species which live below the ice, sometimes under a layer up to 20 metres thick. Some of these species had never been seen before. They've even found species of octopus living in these conditions. And other scientists working on the same project but researching very different habitats on the ocean floor have found large numbers of species congregating around volcanoes, attracted to them by the warmth and nutrients there. However, biologists still don't know how serious the threat to their survival is for each individual species. So a body called the Global Marine Species Assessment is now creating a list of endangered species on land, so they consider things like the size of the population, how many members of one species there are in a particular place, and then they look at their distribution in geographical terms, although this is quite difficult when you're looking at fish because they're so mobile. And then thirdly, they calculate the rate at which the decline of the species is happening. So far, only 1,500 species have been assessed, but they want to increase this figure to 20,000. For each one they assess, they use the data they collect on that species to produce a map showing its distribution. Ultimately, they will be able to use these to figure out not only where most species are located, but also where they are most threatened. So, finally, what can be done to retain the diversity of species in the world's oceans? Firstly, we need to set up more reserves in our oceans, places where marine species are protected. We have some, but not enough. In addition, to preserve species such as leatherback turtles, which live out in the high seas but have their nesting sites on the American coast, we need to create corridors for migration, so they can get from one area to another safely. As well as this, action needs to be taken to lower the levels of fishing quotas to prevent overfishing of endangered species. And finally, there's the problem of bycatch. This refers to the catching of unwanted fish by fishing boats. They're returned to the sea, but they're often dead or dying. If these commercial fishing boats used equipment which was more selective so that only the fish wanted for consumption were caught, this problem could be overcome. OK, so does anyone have any questions?
Exercise 9.
Good morning, Youth Council. Caroline speaking.
Oh, hello. I'm interested in standing for election to the Youth Council, and I was told to give you a call.
That's good. Could I have your name, please?
Yes, it's Roger Brown.
Thank you. I'm Caroline, the Youth Council Administrator. So, do you know much about what the council does, Roger?
I've talked to Stephanie. I think she's the chair of the council.
That's right.
And she told me a lot about it. How it's a way for young people to discuss local issues, for example, and make suggestions to the town council. That's what made me interested.
Fine. Well, let me take down some of your details. First of all, how old are you? You know the council is for young people aged from 13 to 18.
I've just turned 18.
And where do you live, Roger?
Well, that's a bit complicated. At the moment, I'm looking for a flat to rent here, so I'm in a hostel from Monday to Friday. I go back to my parents' place at the weekend.
OK, so where's the best place to send you some information about the council?
Oh, to my parents' address, please. That's 17 Buckley Street, Buckleigh Street, Stamford, Lincolnshire. though you don't really need the county.
Oh, I know Stamford. It's a lovely town. And what's the postcode?
PE9 7QT.
Right, thank you. So are you working here or are you a student?
I started studying at the university a couple of weeks ago, and I've got a part-time job for a few hours a week.
What do you do?
Well, I've done several different things. I've just finished a short-term contract as a courier, and now I'm working as a waiter in one of the big hotels.
Uh-huh. That can't leave you much time for studying.
Oh, it's not too bad. I managed to fit it all in.
What are you studying?
My ambition is to go into Parliament eventually, so my major subject is politics. That's partly why I think the Youth Council is important and want to be a part of it.
And I suppose you're also taking a minor subject, aren't you? I know a lot of people study economics too.
I chose history. To be honest, I'm not finding it as interesting as I expected.
OK, so with your studying and your part-time job, do you have time for any other interests or hobbies?
Well, I spend quite a lot of time cycling, both around town to get to university and to work, and also long distance, from here to London, for instance.
That's pretty impressive. Anything else?
For relaxation, I'm also keen on the cinema. I used to go at least once a week, but I can't manage to go so often now.
Right. Are you sure you'll have enough time for the Youth Council?
Yes, I've worked out that I can afford to reduce my hours at work, and that will make the time.
So is there any particular aspect of the Youth Council's work that appeals to you, Roger?
Well, my sister is blind, so I'm particularly interested in working with disabled young people to try and improve the quality of their lives.
That's great. Well, the best way to get involved is to be nominated by some people who you know.
Right. Can you tell me how to set about organising that?
You should talk to Geoffrey, our elections officer. I can arrange a meeting in the council office with him, if you like.
Yes, please.
He'll be here next Monday, if that suits you.
That's the 14th, isn't it?
Yes.
I can manage late afternoon.
Would you like to suggest a time? He generally leaves around 5:30.
Well, would 4:30 be okay? My last class finishes at 4, so I'd have plenty of time to get to your office.
Right, that's fine. Oh, and could I have a phone number we can contact you on?
Yes, my mobile number's 07788 136711.
Thank you. Well, we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Exercise 10.
Hi, great to see you. I'm Jodie, and I'll be looking after both of you for the first month you're working here at the Amisham Theatre. I'll tell you something about the theatre now, then take you to meet two of the other staff. It's an old building, and it's been modernised several times. In fact, as you can see, we're carrying out a major refurbishment at the moment. The interior has just been repainted, and we're about to start on the exterior of the building. That'll be a big job. The work's running over budget, so we've had to postpone installing an elevator. I hope you're happy running up and down stairs. When the theatre was built, people were generally slimmer and shorter than now, and the seats were very close together. We've replaced them with larger seats, with more legroom. This means fewer seats in total, but we've taken the opportunity to install seats that can easily be moved to create different acting spaces. We've also turned a few storerooms over to other purposes, like using them for meetings. We try hard to involve members of the public in the theatre. One way is by organising backstage tours, so people can be shown round the building and learn how a theatre operates. These are proving very popular. What we're finding is that people want to have lunch or a cup of coffee while they're here, so we're looking into the possibility of opening a cafe in due course. We have a bookshop which specialises in books about drama, and that attracts plenty of customers. Then there are 2 large rooms that will be decorated next month, and they'll be available for hire, for conferences and private functions, such as parties. We're also considering hiring out costumes to amateur drama clubs. Now I want to tell you about our workshops. We recently started a programme of workshops that anyone can join. Eventually, we intend to run courses in acting, but we're waiting until we've got the right people in place as trainers. That's proving more difficult than we'd expected. There's a big demand to learn about the technical side of putting on a production, and our lighting workshop has already started with great success. We're going to start one on sound next month. A number of people have inquired about workshops on makeup, and that's something we're considering for the future. A surprise success is the workshop on making puppets. We happen to have someone working here who does it as a hobby, and she offered to run a workshop. It was so popular, we're now running them every month. Now, a word about the layout of the building. The auditorium, stage and dressing rooms for the actors are all below ground level. Here on the ground floor, we have most of the rooms that the public doesn't see. The majority are internal, so they have windows in the roof to light them. Standing here in the foyer, you're probably wondering why the box office isn't here, where the public would expect to find it. Well, you might have noticed it on your way in. Although it's part of this building, it's next door, with a separate entrance from the road. For the theatre manager's office, you go across the foyer and through the double doors. Turn right, and it's the room at the end of the corridor, with the door on the left. The lighting box is where the computerised stage lighting is operated, and it's at the back of the building. When you're through the double doors, turn left, turn right at the water cooler, and right again at the end. It's the second room along that corridor. The lighting box has a window into the auditorium, which of course is below us. The artistic director's office is through the double doors, turn right, and it's the first room you come to on the right-hand side. And finally, for the moment, the room where I'll take you next, the relaxation room. So, if you'd like to come with me.
Exercise 11.
I've brought my notes on our biology field trip to Rocky Bay, Colin, so we can work on our report on the research we did together.
OK. I've got mine too. Let's look at the aims of the trip first.
Right. What did you have?
I just put something about getting experience of the different sorts of procedures used on a field trip. But we need something about what causes different organisms to choose particular habitats.
I agree. And something about finding out how to protect organisms in danger of dying out.
In our aims? But we weren't really looking at that.
I suppose not. OK, now there's the list of equipment we all had to bring on the field trip. What did they tell us to bring a ruler for?
It was something about measuring the slope of the shore. But of course we didn't need it because we were measuring wind direction and we'd brought the compass for that.
But not the piece of string to hold up in the air. Didn't Mr. Blake make a fuss about us leaving that behind?
Yeah, he does go on. Anyway, it was easy to get one from another of the students.
Now, the next section's the procedure. I sent you the draft of that.
Yeah, it was clear, but I don't think we need all these details of what time we left and what time we got back and how we divided up the different research tasks.
OK, I'll look at that again.
Then we have to describe our method of investigation in detail. So let's begin with how we measured wave speed. I was surprised how straightforward that was.
I'd expected us to have some sort of high-tech device, not just stand there and count the number of waves per minute. Not very precise, but I suppose it was good enough. But the way we measured the amount of salt was interesting.
in the water from the rock pools?
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to check the chemicals we used in the lab when we analysed those samples. Was it potassium chromate and silver nitrate?
That's right.
OK. And we need the map of the seashore. You just left that to me. And I had to do it while the tide was low. Well, that was OK, but the place I started it from was down on the beach. Then I realised I should have gone up higher to get better visibility, so I had to start all over again. But at least I'd got the squared paper, or I'd have had problems drawing it all to scale.
Yeah, it looks good. We could get a map of the region off the internet and see if we need to make any changes.
I had a look, but I couldn't find anything. But you took some pictures, didn't you?
Yeah, I'll email you them if you want.
OK. I'll make my amendments using those. Then I can scan it into our report. Great. Now, when we get to our findings, I thought we could divide them up into the different zones we identified on the shore and the problems organisms face in each zone. So for the highest area...
The splash zone?
Yeah. We found mostly those tiny shellfish that have strong, hard shells that act as protection.
But not from other organisms that might eat them. Predators.
No, that's not the main danger for them. But the shells prevent them from drying out because they're in the open air for most of the time.
Right. And since they're exposed, they need to be able to find some sort of shelter or cover themselves up so they don't get too hot. Then in the middle and lower zones nearer the sea, we need to discuss the effects of wave action.
Yes, and how organisms develop structures to prevent themselves from being swept away or even destroyed by being smashed against the rocks.
I haven't done anything on the geological changes. I don't know what to put for that.
No, we weren't concentrating on that. Maybe we need to find some websites.
Good idea. I've got the lecture notes from Mr. Blake's geology course, but they're too general. But we could ask him which books on our reading list might be most helpful.
Right. OK. Now, I did a draft of the section of sources of possible error in our research, but I don't know if you agree. For example, the size of the sample and whether it's big enough to make any general conclusions from. But I thought actually we did have quite a big sample.
We did. And our general method of observation seemed quite reliable. But we might not be all that accurate as far as the actual numbers go.
Yeah, we might have missed some organisms, if they were hiding under a rock, for example. I wasn't sure about the way we described their habitats. I decided it was probably OK.
Yeah, and the descriptions we gave of the smaller organisms, they weren't very detailed, but they were adequate in this context. I'm not sure we identified all the species correctly, though.
OK, we'd better mention that. Now,
Exercise 12.
We've been discussing the factors the architect has to consider when designing domestic buildings. I'm going to move on now to consider the design of public buildings, and I'll illustrate this by referring to the new Taylor Concert Hall that's recently been completed here in the city. So, as with a domestic building, when designing a public building, an architect needs to consider the function of the building. For example, is it to be used primarily for entertainment, or for education, or for administration? The second thing the architect needs to think about is the context of the building. This includes its physical location, obviously, but it also includes the social meaning of the building, how it relates to the people it's built for. And finally, for important public buildings, the architect may also be looking for a central symbolic idea on which to base the design, a sort of metaphor for the building and the way in which it is used. Let's look at the new Taylor Concert Hall in relation to these ideas. The location chosen was a site in a run-down district that has been ignored in previous redevelopment plans. It was occupied by a factory that has been empty for some years. The whole area was some distance from the high-rise office blocks of the central business district and shopping centre, but it was only 1 kilometre from the ring road. The site itself was bordered to the north by a canal, which had once been used by boats bringing in raw materials when the area was used for manufacturing. The architect chosen for the project was Tom Harrison. He found the main design challenge was the location of the site in an area that had no neighbouring buildings of any importance. To reflect the fact that the significance of the building in this quite run-down location was as yet unknown, he decided to create a building centred around the idea of a mystery, something whose meaning still has to be discovered. So, how was this reflected in the design of the building? Well, Harrison decided to create pedestrian access to the building and to make use of the presence of water on the site. As people approach the entrance, they therefore have to cross over a bridge. He wanted to give people a feeling of suspense as they see the building first from a distance and then close up. And the initial impression he wanted to create from the shape of the building as a whole was that of a box. The first side that people see, the southern wall, is just a high, flat wall uninterrupted by any windows. This might sound off-putting, but it supports Harrison's concept of the building, that the person approaching is intrigued and wonders what will be inside. And this flat wall also has another purpose. At night time, projectors are switched on, and it functions as a huge screen onto which images are projected. The auditorium itself seats 1,500 people. The floors supported by 10 massive pads. These are constructed from rubber and so are able to absorb any vibrations from outside and prevent them from affecting the auditorium. The walls are made of several layers of honey-coloured wood, all sourced from local beech trees. In order to improve the acoustic properties of the auditorium and to amplify the sound, they are not straight, they are curved. The acoustics are also adjustable according to the size of orchestra and the type of music being played. In order to achieve this, there are 9 movable panels in the ceiling above the orchestra, which are all individually motorised. And the walls also have curtains, which can be opened or closed to change the acoustics. The reaction of the public to the new building has generally been positive. However, the evaluation of some critics has been less enthusiastic. In spite of Harrison's efforts to use local materials, they criticise the style of the design as being international rather than local, and say it doesn't reflect features of the landscape or society for which it is built.